Hello, I'm Dr. Matthew Corrigan. Welcome to Jacksonville University. We're at a TV studio at the university, and I want to talk to you today a little bit about why Florida is so important in presidential elections. I'm a political scientist, and I've studied this issue for many, many years, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. First, let me introduce myself a little bit here. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at Jacksonville University. I'm very honored to do that. I'm over numerous academic departments and work with my colleagues, everything from ROTC to the humanities, to the social sciences, to the natural sciences. And we have wonderful faculty who are really excited about meeting you and would welcome you to the university. My research is really focused on presidential politics and politics in Jacksonville and politics in the southern United States. And why that's so important when you talk about Florida is pivotal in presidential elections. And I'll talk a lot more about that here in a second. I've written 4 books that focused on the politics of Jacksonville. I've written books on the Bush and the Clinton presidencies. And I edited a book with a lot of other prominent political scientists about President Trump and winning here in Florida in 2016. He won in Florida, and thus he won the national election. Some of my outside activities from the university is I work with Guardian Ad Litem. I've been on the board of the Nonprofit Center. I also work with a foster care agency, Family Support Services. And this semester I'm teaching a class called Political Parties and Elections, and obviously we're going to focus on the 2020 election. And so we're excited about that. Let me talk about why Florida is so important in presidential elections. And first of all, in 1876, going all the way back there, a compromise involving Florida basically ended Reconstruction. So it basically ended the time of reconciliation after the Civil War and really gave the South back to conservative Democrats who favored segregation at the time. So it was a major election in 1876. Florida helped determine that. It was controversial, just like the year 2000. The year 2000, everybody remembers the hanging Chad and Bush versus Gore. And why that election was so close. Again, because we have an electoral college system. You don't become president just by winning the popular vote. You do it by winning the electoral college. So you have to win a certain number of states. And Florida was the pivotal state. And we went into basically overtime because the election was so close. The Supreme Court decided that George W. Bush would win the election, and we moved on from there. But 2000 was, at least in recent history, the longest election, if you will, because it went a long time after November. Why Florida is so important is because it represents the nation in many different ways, demographically, socially, and so almost anyone you can find in the United States, or a group, or a social marker, or a social movement, you can find in the state of Florida. So if you win the state of Florida in the presidential election, you generally win the presidential election in the nation. Let me talk a little bit about Florida political history, because if you don't understand our history, it's difficult to understand why it's so important now. The biggest problem Florida had really in the 1700s and 1800s, before it was a state, was finding people who wanted to live here. And the reason for that is it was lots of swampland. And of course, you didn't have air conditioning, didn't have much development. The northern part of the state was developed, the southern part was not. And again, there just wasn't a lot of people who wanted to live here. When statehood came around in 1845, again, there was some momentum for people starting to move to Florida, but nothing like the 20th century. Civil War and Reconstruction, Florida went with the South in the Civil War, and obviously the North prevailed. And with that, Florida had to deal with Reconstruction, and also it helped shape politics really for the next 100 years. After Reconstruction ended, Florida became a very typical Southern political state in the United States. And what I mean by that is very conservative, believed in segregation generally, and was very controversial on race relations. And with that, voted with the Democratic Party in 17 out of the 18 wins for Democratic presidential candidates during that time. So again, if during that time, and from 1880 to 1948, if you were in Florida, you were generally a Democrat and you voted with the Democratic Party. Again, a much different Democratic Party then than today. From 1952 to 1992, you could see a Republican shift on the presidential level. Not really below the presidential level, not on state and local elections, but on the presidential level. And so what you have is Republicans winning many of these elections from 1952 to 1992. You talk about Eisenhower and Reagan, etc. From 1996 to 2016, Florida has been a true toss-up state, and that's why it's so important. 3 Democratic wins with Clinton and 2 for Obama, and 3 Republican wins, 2 for Bush and 1 for Trump. And these elections have been very, very close. If you look at the electoral map of Trump's victory, it's 306 to 232. And so you've got to get to 270 electoral votes to win. And Florida, as you're going to see here in the next map, has 29 electoral votes. So again, if Trump didn't win this state in 2016, he would have come very close to getting near that 270. He still would have won, but it had been very, very close. And as we're looking into the 2020 election, and you may see this after the 2020 election, the important point here is up in the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which seem red now, really seem to be trending blue. And that would be for Vice President Biden in 2020. If that occurs, if those 3 states flip, then the Republican candidate will lose, Donald Trump will lose. That's why Florida is so important. With that 29 electoral votes, it stands out. President Trump has moved here to Florida, okay, and said he's become a citizen of Florida. Very convenient timing, but he's done that for this election because Florida is so important. Jacksonville was considered for a short time as the center for the Republican National Convention. That didn't work out for lots of reasons. It just really wasn't enough time to prepare. But again, it shows the importance of this state and this city. As I said, over the last 20 years, the winning margin has averaged 2.5% or less in the state. So very, very close elections. If Republicans don't win the state of Florida, Democrats generally win California and New York, and that starts to get a big lead in the Electoral College. So if you add Florida to it, it makes it even a bigger lead. So that's why it's so important. The fascinating part about Florida is that there's so many different parts to the state. And with that, you really need to look at the different parts. If you come here to Jacksonville University, you're going to be in the northern part of the state. That's generally been the more conservative part of the state. Although our metropolitan area is changing because we're getting a lot of new people moving in, and so the politics are changing somewhat. But if you go down to the southeastern part of the state, that's the Democratic stronghold. And with that, you generally, in presidential elections on a statewide basis, build up a huge lead for Democrats in the southeastern part of the state, and then Republicans have to go to other parts of the state to try to make up that advantage. Jacksonville and the surrounding suburbs are part of that. In 2016, this was a very close election in Jacksonville. Secretary of State Clinton came close but did not win Jacksonville. But the surrounding suburbs, St. Johns County, Clay County, went heavily for Donald Trump. And so it's an important area. It's going to be a lot of focus here in 2020. If you're seeing this after the 2020 race, it's going to be a big focus in 2024. So as you look at the state, you've got to really look at where you are in the state and what you're examining to really determine its politics. The central part of the state is known as a toss-up part of the state. There are Republican areas, there are Democratic areas, and every vote counts here in Florida. And so if consultants see that Republicans are losing by about 50,000 votes in some of their polling, they'll go try to find those 50,000 votes in all sorts of places here in the state. Democrats will do the same. So it's a fascinating chess game. So who's going to win in 2020? Well, if you have Trump v. Biden, as we will have, it really depends on the state who comes out to vote. Okay, if seniors come out to vote in huge numbers, generally helps the Republicans. Although with some of this controversy around COVID, there's some indication that seniors won't vote as strongly for Republicans, but we'll see. The Hispanic vote is much varied here in the state. It's not just a block of one type of voters. So that's an important section to watch and group of voters to watch. The young voters, many of whom are watching right now, you're really important to determine who's going to win this state if you're in this state during the election, because young voters don't come out as much as other voters. And so when young voters come out and tend to vote in one particular direction, it really makes a huge difference. One last question. How are we going to count these votes? Okay, because again, in 2020, people are going to be a little reluctant perhaps to go to polling booths because of the COVID situation. So lots of mail-in voting will be there. We do a lot of mail-in voting here in the state, and we're really equipped to do it. I know there's a lot of controversy around it, but we're fairly well equipped to do it. On election night, there needs to be really a dump of votes that tell you where the early vote is and where the mail-in vote is. So that's a much stricter deadline than many other states. And so with all of this, we'll have lots of mail-in votes, and they should be counted without much problem. But you do have to check every signature. It's a big task. So we'll see how our supervisor of elections do. You know, a really important part of kind of the new world we live in is social media and targeting. And on Facebook, on Pandora, individualized messages. And the Trump campaign did a very good job of this in 2016. We'll see if the Democrats can answer that in 2020 and can really give individualized messages to voters, because it's really important. The bottom line here is the last time a Republican won the presidency without winning Florida was 1924, Calvin Coolidge. And so this state is going to be very, very critical. And what I just talked about here, absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, that's going to be argued about by lawyers. And we have a very strong pre-law program here, and political science is a very important part of that pre-law program. We have criminal justice that some people do for a minor. We have sociology majors who are really involved in our pre-law program. And we have lots of supports for you here. We're about 5 minutes away from the courthouse. So we've got lots of activities, including mock trial, if you're interested in pre-law. I've really enjoyed talking with you today. I hope you come see us at Jacksonville University, and I'll be glad to show you around. Thank you for having me.